Welcome to the Recruitment Hackers Podcast, a show about innovations, technology, and leaders in the recruitment industry. Brought to you by TalkPush, the leading recruitment automation platform.
All right, welcome back to the Recruitment Hackers Podcast. I'm your host, Max Armbruster, and today on the show I have Kimberly Carroll, who is Managing Principal at IA. Kimberly, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Pleasure to have you. And what does the IA stand for? I know AI, but IA?
Yeah, we're not internal audit. It used to be called Inflection Advisors, and we shortened it to IA because nobody could spell or say it. So
Inflection
IA.
Advisors.
Inflection Advisors.
Oh, that's good. Great.
Yeah.
Well, Kimberly, let's get right to it. How did you end up? So Inflection Advisors is an advisory group that helps companies, I guess, manage an inflection and prepare for change, and notably in the HR, including the TA space.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't become a managing principal of an advisory group by right out of school, right out of the gates. You need a career to prepare yourself to get into that space. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up being, in this very specialized field.
Absolutely. So I have an economics degree, which is not anything to do with HR. But when I started my career, I always wanted to help people. So I worked at Fidelity Investments for a little over 13 years, all in a variety of different roles. I implemented the HR payroll outsourcing business. I also worked in systems where I configured the platform itself. And then I also ran their shared services organization. And that was probably the most influential job I've ever had, because you learn a lot about what to do and what not to do as part of running a shared services organization. I also managed a global outsourcing business. And then I met Mark, who is the founder of IA, and we had hired him to come over and do some work for us. And then once I figured out that consulting wasn't all bad and that I really liked consulting and helping others, I moved into IA. I've been at IA for about 8 years, working with a ton of different clients, from anything from looking at their HR processes and making them better, or selecting technology to help them implement their change, or building vision. So we do a whole slew of different things at IA, and I love it. I love what I do. And so my career has been all around helping people.
I mean, I can see, for me as an entrepreneur, I could see the joy of moving from managing a shared services center, which is all about process and repetition and get everything ironed out, to being a consultant, moving from client to client and being in charge of your own schedule. It would suit me very much, but it's not necessarily a transition for everybody.
No.
But I guess it's for that stage of your career also where you're more about, sharing experience and maybe resolving conflict. Do people bring you in when there's battles within?
Absolutely. We not only battles within, but battles with their technology partners and stuff like that. So we do help with guiding our clients through the changes that they need to make. We're not shy consultants, and we don't have a playbook. So we have processes ourselves, but we are ones that we will come in and we don't say, yes, you should do this, or we tell them this is what you should do. And it's a little bit different of a consulting process. And one of the things about IA that's a little, I say, different is that we actually want to work ourselves out of a job. We would like to teach and leave and go to the next client, because our role is to help as many clients as we can. But if we get stuck at a client for a long time, that keeps us from helping other clients. So for us,
that's the model of like Accenture or Deloitte, or create enough work for everybody for the next 20 years.
Yeah, we don't want to do that. That's not what we want to do. And that's just us, because when I got into consulting, I had that fear of getting into consulting because I didn't like consultants. So, I hate to say that, but it's just one of those things for me that I feel like if I can influence a couple people or a couple clients or a couple companies to think differently, to really move forward, to not just do it because that's the way that you've been told to do it, is to start thinking for themselves and get us out of there. Then that to me is the importance of what we do. My first client at IA, they're a fascinating client. They clean slaughterhouses. I mean, so that's what they do, but they're quite large. 16, 17,000 employees. They had a hard time with recruiting. They had, because their turnover was 150%. They did not have technology.
So they were not able to retain people in the slaughterhouse jobs.
They were not.
You would think that if you're willing to take the job, by that point, you're going to keep it, because you kind of made the mental leap that I'm going to
do that work.
But they still couldn't retain them. Amazing.
No, are you really shocked? I'm not shocked. So, but what's fascinating is they were my first client. They had no automation, no nothing. They had a lot of paper-based processes. All of their applications were still paper-based. So we finally got them automated on some systems and stuff like that to really get them so that they could, that turnover is quite a bit, and to be able to get them to not have so much paper. But that client is still a client that they will only come back to us. They've told us we will not go anywhere else. And it's not because, and I'm not doing work with them all the time. It's just they call for, Mark says I'm the worst consultant because I give free consulting all the time, because they will call me at the whim and just ask questions, and I won't turn them down to say, no, I'm not going to answer your questions. So anyways, I love that part of what we do, is that we build relationships with our clients and their lifelong relationships. And that's what we need to do. But that client was one of my special clients because of the work they do.
It sounded a little bit like you, with that story where you said, they had high turnover. We replaced the paperwork with the systems. And how is that supposed to resolve turnover issues? How do you connect the dots here?
How do I connect those dots? Is they are able to do better with the automation that they put in place. And in the States, you have to do E-Verify to be able to support it. With that automation, they've been able to then detect the people that are not able to work in the United States. So that turnover, even though it's still high, so they had it at like 150%, their metric was to drop it. And I don't remember, and I apologize, but I think they dropped it to like 120%, which is a pretty significant drop for them. But they were able to, with automation, be able to get those employees or those candidates in the system faster, interviewed through the work verification process and on the floor. And the people that they were hiring were better suited or legal to work in the States. So
Right. When you speed things up, you have less of a dropout. When you wait longer, the candidates, the hires that you're left with at the end of the process are the ones that are also a little bit less desirable, I suppose.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So your Fidelity Investments, I know it's a long time ago now, but that was your last big corporate role, we could say, and that was running a shared services center.
Yeah.
One way to describe change management and change in HR is a process of centralization and decentralization, and the two are always happening, right? They're sort of on balance and counterbalance. And the arguments for centralization and having a shared services center are well known. It's specialization, get really good at something and reduce costs that way. In a recruitment context or in an otherwise context, have you sometimes taken the other side of the argument where you've argued for decentralization and, let's do away with a shared service? Have you been in these situations?
Yeah, so I love putting it in the hands of the actual leader. So I'm not a lover of centralizing I'm not putting a shared service together for recruiting. I'm not as much of a lover of that. I just have had a couple clients that have gone down that path, and mostly because, to be honest with you, is they don't trust their managers, and I don't understand that. I mean, like, you're hiring these people, trust your managers to do the job that they're supposed to be doing. A lot of from a retail perspective, a lot of the time what I hear is, well, we don't want to take them off the floor because that's money that, they're trying to sell, they're trying to do all of that. And I'm like, but if you make it easy for them, right? So you get them a device, you give them something, the process shouldn't be that hard. So I am not, as I said, I'm not a fan of centralization of the talent acquisition process, but I understand it from where they're coming from, because they want to be able to utilize resources that are not trying to sell their products to be able to do it. But I'm not a fan. I think that you should put it in the hands of the hiring leaders and train them and teach them and give them tools that actually help them through it.
Yeah, I had this argument with my head of HR just yesterday where I was saying, let's get it done because we have a graduate hiring program right now. So let's just get it done. Let's just hire these people. And then she was arguing, no, we need the hiring managers involved. We need them to be talking to them. Otherwise, they're not going to feel the responsibility to take care of them properly. Right. So just from that perspective, having the hiring manager involved in the decision, even if it's at the very end, I think has obvious benefits for retention and onboarding.
Yeah. Have you ever taken on an employee that you never hired? That, to me, that's hard. When you have to now manage an employee that you did not get to interview or you weren't part of that process, and now you're.
I had one of those who didn't even speak English, so that's even harder.
That would be really hard. That's really hard. So yeah, I think that managers should be involved. They have to manage those people. You have to build a connection with your employees or your team members or whatever you call them. You have to build that connection, and that's how you do it at the beginning. And then you talked about onboarding. I have a hard time with onboarding. So
everybody does, yeah.
Yes.
So we can centralize some things, right? Like running the ads on Indeed and getting as many candidates as possible, but still do the interview on site, on store, and make it easy for them. Minimize the time off, of course. What are some examples that come to mind for excesses done in the shared services where people have tried to take it too far outside of the recruitment space, actually, if you have examples where you've had to deflate the shared services center?
Well, I think that one of the things that people think about shared services is that they're just the transaction. They should just do whatever, the COE says or the manager or whatever. They should just take on the transaction no matter what. And that's a misnomer. Like, that's not what shared services is all about. Shared services is about good, repeatable processes. And as soon as that process is no longer repeatable and that can just be done, it should be pushed back out to whoever owns that business process, because shared services doesn't own the business processes themselves. Typically, the COE or whoever they dub as the owner of the business process should develop processes that make sense. Shared services, so that's when I've seen good shared services actually and good shared services leaders push them back out. I have an example of a process that we had at Fidelity, and HR wanted us to start terminating people manually in the system for them when the manager should be actually terminating them.
Yes.
And it was because of one field in there that for an executive, it had to be pushed, that you couldn't do it because there was a rule in there that you couldn't push their health and continuation date past 6 months. Well, for an executive, you can go however long they wanted to. So they wanted to push us that process to term all executives because they couldn't enter this one field. And I pushed back hard on them. I said, no, we are not taking on that process because it's not repeatable and the manager should be able to do it. There can be a ticket open for us to update that field for you, but we're not going to be taking on the whole entire termination process because you all think that the field can't be entered. That's where shared services should be. They should be able to say no to their business partners, but it should also push back to their business partners when when they're asking for requirements that don't make sense from a business process perspective.
Yeah, I think psychology or groups like to grow. Growth is always something that is appealing to a team. It kind of, washes away problems. If things are growing, then everything else kind of sorts itself out. And so for a shared services organization, or for any organization, I think the temptation to grow is always there as well, where the customer said so, or the internal customer said so, I'm just going to do it. And resisting that temptation must be, I guess systematically it's impossible. So it's hard to argue against it, but yeah, I guess you do it well. It's about process ownership, and then, reminding the operations of their responsibility to build something unique, something that's theirs.
That's right. And they own it. They need to own it. And shared services can help support, but it's not the owner. And they should be able to have leverage to say that. And I will say that I've known a couple companies that have rolled out shared services, and it wasn't a dictated model. Like, you didn't have to, and you could just opt in, which I think that is a huge mistake. You either do it or you don't. You don't halfway do it. And I've told that company that multiple times, and it hasn't resonated quite yet with them, but I will continue to push them on actually putting it in there, because you got to think about it. Shared services is almost like you're outsourcing to a third party, but you're internally doing it, which is great. But it's still a cost center, and it's not making money for you as a company, but it's supporting you making money. And that's what people have to remember. It should be, you should always do it.
And is it possible to turn a shared services into a profit center? Like, have you seen these examples where it started out with, we're servicing internal customers and wow, we're so good at this, let's start selling stuff to the outside world?
I haven't seen it successfully done, but I've seen it where companies, like, they do the managed processes. So like the Alights, the PwCs, they actually manage business processes and outsource. So they, maybe they started as a shared services, but they go into the managed business processes outside, but not an internal. Like, it was funny is, you always think that you can do that and you could build these processes to go outside of your company. Most of the time you can't. I don't think you can, because your processes are typically not that well refined that you can do that. Yeah.
Lots of people involved.
Yeah.
And in HR, there's a very strong local and regulatory component to dealing with payroll, benefits, even hiring. And so how do large shared services handle that? Are they able to have like one global shared service, or is it done per country? Do you know what I mean? Is there some tension there?
There can be. So typically what I see is that you regionalize the shared services. They all report under one, but to get closer to your local, you would regionalize those, right? So Europe might have one. The North America could have one. And then EMEA, those would be local. But we're also seeing a lot, especially if the company has little volume or little a smaller population of employees, that's where you'll see another, technology come into play, and that they actually do a more tiered model where they actually outsource some of that servicing to another provider that has local resources that can help them with that. In the United States, you typically see a centralized service, but in other countries, it just depends on the volume of employees that you have. Like, I have a client that has maybe like 10 people. Do you really need to put a shared service in for 10 people, or do you manage them via a tiered model?
Okay, so you can have your main business with supported by a shared service, and for the geographical branches, that's when you bring in the consultants or a third party.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of work in the offshore call center space, and it seems like 2020 was as good a year as any. Like, work continued to grow, and you could say American jobs keep going abroad.
Yeah.
Does that sound about right? Because sometimes once in a while the industry talks about jobs coming back in, and so I'm wondering if you experienced 2020 the same way I did, where basically not much has changed there. The trends are just continuing.
Yeah, I think that trend will continue, especially as companies outsource some of the business processes outside of their company. I think that, and a lot of companies are starting to do that more and more. It was a trend, then it slowed down, and then the trend started coming back, because I think that people are realizing, or companies are realizing, that there isn't a need to have that type of resource in-house, right? So payroll, right? So take payroll. Payroll is one of the biggest ones that gets outsourced because it's such a pain in the butt process to manage internally. And so that's one that gets outsourced quite a bit. But I think it just depends on the company and what they're looking to do. We're seeing a lot of shared services coming in internally. And then some of the companies that even though they built the shared service, they're like, you know what, we're now going to outsource it because now we built the shared service. Now we should be able to, we have now cleaner processes. We can now outsource it. You can't outsource if you have, I was going to say a bad word, terrible processes. That was going to come out of my mouth.
You can't manage what you cannot do, ideally.
Yeah.
With a few exceptions, but generally, if you're trying to manage somebody on a process you haven't owned, it's going to be horrible.
Well, and you can automate processes via robotics now. So, I mean, you might as well start looking at that. And if you can make processes easier, why have a person doing it when the system can do it just as well? So yeah, and then most of the business process outsourcing industry is all about selling that expertise now. They start with the robotization conversation, and then, oh yeah, and by the way, we also have 100,000 headcounts that can help you with everything that cannot be automated. Right.
To really change their pitch. Okay, cool. Well, one question that I really like to ask for my guest is to talk about some of the traumatic experiences regarding hiring mistakes. And I want you to think back on your time in Fidelity or another place where you hired somebody and it blew up in your face and there was blood on the wall, slaughterhouse style. And if you can relate to for me and for listeners, what you learned out of that hiring mistake, why you made it, or what you got out of it.
Yeah, so one of the challenges I have with my hiring is that I'm not as strict as reviewing a resume. And I mean, I don't typically ask for, I want to get to know people better. One of them, and actually it's not even with Fidelity, it's with IA. We hired somebody that used to work for me at another company.
It's a fresh wound.
It kind of is. And the problem with doing that sometimes is you expect them to understand how to move into a role that maybe they're not prepared for. And that was my biggest mistake is, they did a great job at another firm. They were very good, but coming and doing this type of work, not everybody can do it. And for me, what kind of sucked about it was I almost lost a friend, right? So I really knew this person and you almost lose this person as a friend. And that is my mistake. I should have thought through and probably been a little more not forthcoming about the work, but more forthcoming about asking questions about how she would handle or they would handle the work and give her examples. And I didn't do that. And I think that that's a mistake. And we're a small company. So losing a person in the middle of, a project or something like that, that's a huge loss. And I think that was my mistake. And I don't live with regret because I don't think you can, but I can learn from what I did. And so the next hire I do, it's not always going to be somebody I know because it's going to be somebody based on the work that we need to be done.
Right. So,
does that make
yeah, I think probably anybody who's hired somebody they know has experienced that.
Yes, and I've hired others that I know that are great. So.
Yeah, if anybody's listening and wants to work for Kimberly and you know her, it's not over yet. There's still chance.
Not over. No, I'm not giving up on it. It's just I'm going to grill you a little harder, I think.
Great. Well, I think we're up for time. Great to get to know your business and talk about shared services. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.
That was Kimberly Carroll reminding us that even if you decide to go with a shared services center for all the right reasons, you should remember that the operations owns the process, especially for talent acquisition, but also for all businesses. Hope that was insightful for you as it was for me. And please subscribe for more and share with friends.